Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1233, Coming to Terms with the End of the World. Not paying the sin of solace any attention, Sunny bent down and studied the rune. It was carved into the wood, but not with any kind of instrument. The grooves were deep, but crude and uneven, with rough and shaky edges. It was as if someone used their nails to scratch the rune into the wooden surface in a fit of madness. The rune was a familiar one, too. Wish. It had other meanings, too: desire, yearning, longing, aspiration. Even hope, sometimes, depending on the context. Sunny knew that rune all too well. How could he not, after spending so much time on the Chained Isles? But its most fundamental meaning was just that, a wish. He stared at the rune for some time, thinking. Who had carved it into the ancient wood? And why? Had it been carved before the piece of wood he was using as a raft ended up as flotsam, or after? What did it mean? Sunny hesitated for a bit, then tentatively scratched at the wood with his nail. It was really tough, much tougher than mundane would have been. This raft of his turned out to be really sturdy. He wouldn't be able to leave a scratch on it without losing a nail or two. What are you doing? Sunny gleaned at the Sin of Solace, who was looking at him with a bewildered expression. Playing dumb, huh? He pointed to the rune. Were you trying to hide it from me? The apparition tilted its head in confusion. Hide what? An angry expression appeared on Sunny's face, and he gritted his teeth. Stop messing with me, you pale bastard. You have been standing here this whole time, as if trying to prevent me from noticing the rune. However, deep inside, he felt a hint of doubt. Was he now seeing things? Was the rune not really there? In the Sin of Solace suddenly laughed. Gods. You expression, it's priceless. What about the rune? So there is a rune. Why would I care? In fact, why do you care? You seem completely beside yourself. Sunny frowned, remained silent for a while, then let out a sigh. Indeed, why would he care about some rune? Yeah, it might have possessed some meaning, like hinting at something about hope. But a single rune was not enough to learn anything. Maybe he was just so bored that he made a big deal out of nothing. Maybe he was just trying really hard not to think about other things. Like the fate of East Antarctica. Or rain. Or himself. With a sigh, Sunny sprawled on the ancient wood and stared into the mist. East Antarctica was most likely finished. This was an appalling tragedy and a personal wound for Sunny. For the first time in his life, he had tried to act upon his nascent principles. And failed. In the end, his intervention didn't amount to anything. Sure, he had prevented the great clans from causing the deaths of many civilians and government soldiers. But with the great abominations now rampaging across the southern quadrant, how many of those people he had saved would survive? Ah, this feeling. How bitter. The taste of failure was painful enough to make him want to never have such desires again. To never have the nerve to try and force his will upon the world again. To never try. So childish. He was like a novice who had swung his training sword once, failed to perform the cut perfectly, and instantly gave up on wanting to learn swordsmanship. How many thousands of swings had it taken him to gain a basic level of control over his blade on the forgotten shore? One failure, no matter how painful, was not a reason to stop trying. Nevertheless, even if he somehow overcame his disillusionment and numbness, the cruel truth remained the same. The chain of nightmares was only the start of a global catastrophe. Sunny did not know how many years the destruction of the waking world would take, a couple, a dozen, or 100, but he believed Morgan when she told him that it was inevitable. The scope of this truth was so vast that he could not even really comprehend it. It was the end of the world. Or was it? I'm stuck here in the third nightmare, and may very well die. But Rain is out there in the waking world, which might be consumed by a global cataclysm at any moment. Sunny could not help but feel restless, disheartened, and afraid for his sister. At least Serpent is with her. It will protect her. Regardless of that, the revelation of the dire future forced him to look beyond his own experiences and motivations. Sunny had been struggling against many things ever since becoming an awakened. His personal indignation at becoming bonded with Nephi's, his desire to be stronger than her and escape the chains of fate, his animosity toward the great clans and his ambition to see as many people as possible survive the chain of nightmares. All these matters were important and valid. But, blinded by them, he never seriously considered the most fundamental and important conflict. Mostly because it had always seemed too large and distant to have anything to do with a small and insignificant person like him. The nightmare spell, which was slowly consuming humanity. Now that he knew that the waking world had reached the point of no return, Sonny couldn't ignore the looming terror of it anymore. This is just infuriating. I can't believe that I ended up being the bigger fool, out of the two of us. Back when Nephi's had told him that her goal was to destroy the spell, Sonny called her a lunatic. And he still believed that she was, her desire was nothing but pure madness. However, as it turned out, the world they lived in was a world of madness. So it was Sonny, who just wanted to operate a memory store and live a peaceful life, who was misguided. In retrospect, maybe Neff's desire to conquer all the nightmares and destroy the spell was a bit insane, but Sonny's desire to just be free of it all and live carefree was pure lunacy. The only sane ones were probably the people who fell somewhere in between these two extremes. Like Effie. Chapter 1234, Two Futures. Laying on a makeshift raft that was being pulled through boundless mist by a powerful current, Sonny suddenly burst out in laughter. I see now. Sin of Solace glanced at him with curiosity. What is it that you see, if you don't mind me asking? Sonny remained silent for a while. No, it's just that. I suddenly remembered an old conversation. Years ago, in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, Effie, who was mostly a stranger back then, had told Sonny a strange thing. She had told him that the dream realm was not hell, like everyone believed, but instead a paradise. A dark and cruel one, but a paradise nevertheless. The kind of paradise they all deserved. He knew now that Effie felt that way because she had been trapped in a broken body and constrained to a wheelchair in the waking world, but received a chance to be healthy and vibrant in the dream realm. However, that was not the only reason. And Effie also believed that the waking world was dying, not because of the spell, but because of what humans themselves had done to the ecosystem they needed to exist. It might have even died already if it wasn't for the awakened and the gifts they had received from the spell. The last thing she had said to him back then was that one day, in the future, more people would consider the dream realm a paradise, just like she did. This is what it comes down to, isn't it? If Sonny tried to think realistically about the future, then the destruction of the waking world did not necessarily have to mean the destruction of humanity. Humanity was going to persevere. The small part of humanity that had access to the dream realm, to be more precise. There were hundreds of thousands of awakened in the world, a few hundred masters, and a few dozen saints. But these numbers were going to swell soon. If the chain of nightmares was any indication, the nightmare spell was starting to run rampant once again. There was going to be an incredible amount of infected in the coming years. Numerous new sleepers, numerous new awakened. There would be much more masters, too, and even much more saints. Even if the waking world was consumed, these people would be able to live on in the small part of the dream realm that had already been conquered by humanity. Many things would be lost, but the citadels were not that far from being self-sufficient. Especially the great citadels like Bastion and Ravenheart, those were already like cities. So, this is it. This is the future. Out of 3 billions, just a few millions would survive. Sonny remained motionless, staring into the mist. The Sin of Solace was silent. It is the future the sovereigns believe in, at least. Sonny heard once that the sovereigns had long given up on the waking world. Now, he understood better why, and what for. The great clans had been concentrating on creating a landing zone for humanity all this time, carving out a piece of habitable land in the dream realm. Their reasoning was grim and cruel, but realistic. Sonny stirred. But it is not the only possible future. There was also the future Nephis believed in. Nephis, who saw the sovereigns as traitors and sinners, not because they had destroyed her family, but because they had given up on trying to resist the spell. If a new supreme appeared. If that supreme conquered the fifth nightmare and became sacred. Or even divine, maybe. Then who was to say how the future would turn out? Maybe if a god was born from humanity, a divine miracle would save everyone. Wasn't it a sweet dream? Sure, the probability of something like that happening was 0. It was not realistic at all. It was impossible. Just a bit of wishful thinking. However, Sunny couldn't help but allow himself to bask in that unrealistic dream for a few moments. He turned his head, staring at the lone rune that was carved into the ancient wood of his makeshift raft. Wish. Even though he knew that a miracle would not happen, he still wished that it did. But then, what was Sunny's own wish? He wanted to be free. Despite everything, he still wanted to be free. He wanted to have a choice, to be the master of his own fate, not a slave to it. He wanted to be strong, too. Strong enough to break his chains, and protect those he loved. He wanted to live a good life. It's time to stop thinking about the big picture and concentrate on what exactly I have to do right now. Most of the people he cared about were now inside this nightmare. There were a few of them in the waking world, as well, including Rain. So, his goal was rather simple. First of all, he had to survive. He also had to find his friends, and make sure that they survived, too. Then, they had to conquer the third nightmare and return to the waking world. A god might descend from the machine to save humanity, or not. Most likely not. In any case, it would not happen anytime soon, so the next few years, at least, would go according to the future that the sovereigns envisioned. In that future, the value of a saint would be tremendous. A saint would not be easily dismissed or bullied, in fact, the opposite would be true. So, Sunny had to become a saint. This was very convenient, considering that he was already inside a third nightmare, and the only alternative to transcendence was death. Additionally, as a saint, he would be able to bring people, even mundane people, into the dream realm. So, should the waking world really perish, he would be able to save Rain and a few others from that destruction. Or give them a chance to be saved, at least. Survive. Transcend. These were his goals, for now. And should he succeed, maybe other things would become possible, too. Become strong. Live a good life. Protect those I love. Defeat fate. Be free. What a beautiful wish. Lulled by the sweet promise of a dreamlike future and the gentle swaying of the waves, Sunny slowly fell asleep.